In the Avatar: The Last Airbender comics, we see as Zuko tries to learn how to properly rule the Fire Nation after the end of the story, but he thinks about how he put his father in jail and his sister in an institution, while out there somewhere his mother has been banished this whole time, and because of all of that instability, he finds it hard to believe he'll ever be a good leader. From here, we go back into the past to see a woman named Ursa arriving home after spending the day with her boyfriend, where her mother cries because the Fire Lord is visiting their household. Fire Lord Azula tells Ursa that his son Prince Ozai has a proposition for her, likely trying to have her hand in marriage, and it's here where it starts to become clear that Ursa is Zuko's mom, or in the past before he was ever born, as we start to learn more about her. However, quickly we cut back to the present as Zuko visits the Fire Nation's dungeons, where Zuko has arranged a meeting between himself and his captured family as he brings them tea to try and smooth over tensions in the room. But instantly Azula, who's been strapped into a straitjacket, bites the tray and flips the tea over, yelling at Zuko that she won't let him watch her lap up the tea like a dog, as inside his cell the Fire Lord smiles with a crazed look in his face as well, and this family story starts to spin out of control. Ty Lee has to block Azula's chi to keep her from bending, as Azula falls to the ground and questions how the Kyoshi warriors managed to get to her two best friends and turn them against her, especially when they should be more afraid of her than loyal to anybody else. Zuko tells her to stop being crazy because he brought them tea to try and lend a little dignity to the situation. However, Azula tells him that if he wants to prove he really cares about them at all, he'll let her and Ozai talk in private without anyone listening. And this causes Zuko to actually listen and give them 30 minutes alone, as once again Ozai makes a crazy plotting face. It's at this point where we cut back to the past and see Zuko's mother in a carriage alongside Ozai, being told that she should be happy since she comes from a backwater village and now she'll never want for anything again. However, things go left when her boyfriend Ikem stands in the road trying to keep the Fire Lord from leaving and offering to fight for his true love, and the Fire Nation soldier see red, who Ursa tells Ozai to call off because this is her childhood friend. When he does, she gets out and explains the situation, but Ikem isn't buying it and tells her that he'll only go home if she tells him this is what she actually wants. If not, he's ready to fight the entire country for her alone. But when she tells him to go home and leaves with Ozai, we cut back to the presidency, Zuko escorting Azula alongside Mai and Ty Lee, when he decides that he wants to continue the rest of the journey with her alone, because he wants her to start living in the castle under constant guard instead of having to be in an institution. It's clear he really loves his sister deep down and he wants to make things right between them, but at that moment Azula questions if Zuko has ever been chi-blocked by Ty Lee before, as she reveals that she's actually gotten loose from her straitjacket just in time for her bending to return. And suddenly, at point blank range, Azula lets loose a lightning bolt against Zuko, trying to kill him, as she breaks out of her binds and tries to escape custody as Fire Lord Zuko sends a fire blast her way, telling her to stop. However, Azula is still as talented and dangerous as ever, as she sends blue flames towards her brother with a kick and escapes deeper into the castle before completely disappearing. In the past, we see as the boyfriend of Zuko's mom before she married the Fire Lord cries in the forest all alone, as he decides to leave the village and start living in isolation, and even makes a hut for himself to survive, when one day as he rests in his camp, he stumbles upon a massive spirit wolf drinking water next to him, and looks on completely shocked. In the present, Zuko hunts through the castle for his sister before coming across a secret room that the Fire Lord left in the castle with many of his personal belongings, and as Azula reaches into a chest and pulls out a series of letters, she tells Zuko that they're letters from his mom that he's never seen before, and they're likely his only hope of ever finding her. But right in front of his face, she uses her fire to burn every single letter to a crisp, but oddly enough, Azula tells Zuko that she wants to find their mother just as badly as he does. We cut back to the past and see the wedding between Ursa and Fire Lord Ozai. Ozai tells her that she has lovely parents, but she should think of her last words to them, because as his wife, he expects her to cut ties to every part of her old life and never even mention any of it, meaning she'll never see her parents or anyone she knew ever again, since she belongs to him. In the present day, we watch as Aang and his friends arrive at the Fire Nation capital on Appa's back, and they're quickly greeted by Iroh, who calls Zuko into the room to meet them, where he notices that they left Toph behind because she's actually starting to teach metal bending to her own group of fighters and is far too busy these days thanks to the popularity it brought her. From here, everyone is really surprised as Zuko explains to them that he recently got information on where his mother might be, as he wants them all to travel to the town of Hira, but he needs them to come along because he has to bring Azula with him completely unbound, and he wants their backup in case things go wrong. Here at this moment, as everyone stands off against her and things get pretty awkward, a new journey begins as Azula officially joins Team Avatar. Aang starts to understand that finding their mother might make Azula more peaceful, so he puts any other problems behind them and wakes up the next day wishing Azula a good morning, even loading her bag despite the fact that she's still being really rude to everyone. Sokka offers to take charge of watching her since he didn't like a comment she made about him and his boomerang earlier, but the second he tries to order her around, she lets loose a little spark that knocks knocks his boomerang out of his hand, causing Katara to think fast and freeze Azula's hand, telling her to never touch her brother again, and offering to watch Azula during the trip since these two have their own sort of rivalry going on. As the group takes to the skies, Aang thinks about how this is even better than old times since now he can kiss Katara whenever he wants since she's his girlfriend. But unlike before, they have Azula sitting there scowling at them, starting to act a little crazy as she questions why they ever got involved with her in the first place and how they were convinced to fight against her before any of them had even met her. Eventually, Zuko is able to calm her down, but this is going to be a long journey. Zuko tells him that he wants to arrive before sunset and not at nighttime like a bunch of bandits. However, when Aang starts to make a really angry face, he says he feels something off in the spirit world and looks off the side of Appa where he spots a massive spirit wolf running on the ground, and this distraction allows Azula to stand on the side of the air bison, telling Zuko she'll give their mother his regards when she finds her, and jumping off the side, causing Aang to dive after her with his glider. It's at this point where Azula actually burns a hole in the glider and uses her lightning to send Aang crashing down towards the ground while she darts across the landscape and eventually escapes the group. As Azula jumps over a running river, she hears her mother's voice as it tells her that she's only hurting herself, as Azula screams at the surface of the water where she sees her mother's reflection and tells her that she found a letter that proves her mother has been conspiring against her and basically led to all the worst parts of her life because Azula had power unlike her mother did. But as this conversation continues, it's easy to see that Azula is definitely still insane. She eventually attacks the water, telling her mother that she's even turned Azula's own mind against her. Zuko arrives on the scene questioning who she's talking to and trying to calm Azula down, but she squares up ready for a fight and he begs her, saying he really doesn't want to have to do this. They're interrupted by Katara, who once again comes flying in and freezes Azula using her ice, making her completely helpless. However, the entire group freezes once they spot a massive spirit wolf that Aang saw earlier, as we go back into a flashback where Zuko's mom writes a note in a room covered in masks, where we even see the blue mask Zuko eventually uses to free Aang. Baby Zuko comes in after having a nightmare that Azula burned down his entire room, but after Ursa cheers him up and puts him in bed, she gives the letter she wrote to the only worker that she trusts, an older woman named Elua, who promises to make sure the letter gets to Hera, but actually puts all the letters in a chest behind her back. This time though, when snooping, she reads the contents of the letter and takes it directly to the Fire Lord, who is training in a room full of dummies, as the Fire Lord reads it and gets enraged. But we come back to the President C Team Avatar facing off against a massive blue spirit wolf. Aang tells everyone to be respectful of it since it must have left the spirit world for a good reason, and as he tries to explain the situation to the wolf and even apologizes, it attacks him anyway and literally eats his friend's attacks when they try to get involved. Eventually, Appa actually flies in and starts fighting this huge wolf off, eventually sending it flying away with his really powerful tail. However, when this causes it to throw up a massive swarm of moth bees, the group starts to suffocate because of just how many there are, causing Zuko to freeze Azula, who offers to help as she lets loose a bolt of lightning that causes the moths to follow the light away from the group, and everyone gets to settle down for a night of camping so they can rest off their injuries they got from this spiritual experience. Here we actually see a nice conversation between Sokka and Zuko, as Sokka jokes that he usually likes the cold, but maybe he's been away from home too long, and tells Zuko that he'd do anything for his sister, causing Zuko to cover Azula in a blanket, where he makes a shocking discovery. Zuko finds a strange letter hidden in her boots as he's trying to cover her with a blanket, and the content of this letter completely breaks Zuko's mind. He finds out that this is actually a letter written from his mom Ursa to her previous boyfriend Ikam, where she explains to him that she's sad she'll never see him again, but when she looks into their eyes of their son Zuko, she sees him and it causes her thoughts to always be with him. Zuko can't believe what he's reading. Is he really not the son of Fire Lord Ozai after all? This is the end of the first third of the search for Zuko's mom, where already quite a lot has happened as Azula's mind seems to be completely unraveling, and it's hard to tell what exactly is real and what is just part of Fire Lord Ozai's plans here. We see the morning come as Azula wakes up and feels her mother's hands on her face, freaking out since obviously she hasn't seen her mother in years, as Ursa tells Azula to give up this quest and go home. However, that doesn't mean that Azula doesn't have her own purpose. Azula gets furious at her mother preparing a bolt of lightning for her, while Ursa tells the lightning bender that she needs to take off her mask of fear to finally be able to see the beauty of her own destiny. And for a second, we see Azula powering down, starting to question if she really does want the throne. Suddenly, we snap back to reality and realize that this was all just a hallucination, as she grabs Katara by the arm by accident, but in that moment, Azula stands there realizing that the letter she was holding is gone, as she stares down the two water tribe members and her blue flames start to come out, asking where is Zuko. Off on the edge of a cliff, we see as Zuko shows Aang the letter revealing his true lineage, explaining how so much of his life makes sense now. But Aang still doesn't believe this 100% because he says there's some things that don't add up, and even if it was true, what does that mean about Zuko's reign as Fire Lord, because this would make Azula the rightful ruler of the Fire Nation. When Azula gets mad that Zuko has stolen a letter from her on the search for their mother, she sends a fiery attack his way, saying she'll never let their mother win, as we cut back to the past. In the past, we see Zuko and his mom walking happily through their garden as Azula looks a little less happy and decides to burn a bush for some attention. When Zuko tells on her, she lights a fire under him and gets sent to her room, while Zuko cries to his mom that he doesn't understand why his sister is so mean. But on the sidelines watching this entire thing, we see as Fire Lord Ozai walks away and heads towards the overlook in his castle, where he's met by an archer from the Yuan tribe, a legendary tribe of archers who are so talented they could all pin a fly to a tree from 100 yards away. But this one specifically was so good he could do it blindfolded. Fire Lord Ozai tells the man to travel to a small village on the edge of the Fire Nation called Hira, and when he's there, he wants the assassin Vachir to find a man named Ikam, tell him that the Fire Lord himself ordered his execution, and rid the world of him. Vachir, of course, happily takes his mission on and bows his head as he ventures towards the village of Hira, trying to end the life of the man that could be Zuko's father, as we see as Azula pulls up on Aang and Zuko, sending a volley of blue fireballs their way, as Aang worries about what Azula might have done to Sokka and Katara, and Zuko tells him to go search for them since he can handle her alone. As Aang flies away, Azula keeps screaming to Zuko to give her back the letter that he stole from her, as Zuko jumps over a big splash of her flames, trying to hit his sister with a fiery leg sweep that she dodges as well. As she lands, she knocks Zuko down and takes a letter off of him, but when she tries to jump away, Zuko actually catches her by the leg and slams her down, before picking her up by her collar with one hand and hanging her over the edge of the cliff, yelling to his sister that she's always put him through so much trouble, but he doesn't understand why their relationship needs to be this way. It's here where Azula realizes that Zuko could have burned the letter at any point, but didn't, leading her to believe that he actually wants her to have it. As Zuko explains to her that they don't need to always fight and would be better off working together, as he puts Azula down and she smiles, questioning if her dear brother Zuzu is actually on her side. Elsewhere, we see Aang and Katara putting out the forest fire that Azula almost started, as they all get on top of Appa, and this uncomfortable alliance continues. We cut back to the past and see a memory of Azula explaining a day with her tutor to her father where she made a fool of her instructor. When Zuko makes a comment on how what Azula did was wrong, Ozai snaps at him, telling Zuko that when he was born they weren't even sure that he was a firebender, and at that time the Fire Lord almost had him cast out of the Fire Nation because of how embarrassing it would be to the king to have a firstborn son that can't even bend, and tells the boy that if it wasn't for his mother and the Fire Sages begging Ozai to give Zuko a chance, he wouldn't even be here. This causes Zuko's mom to actually get really angry with Ozai, telling him that that was an awful thing to say. But it's at this moment where an aide comes in and tells Ozai that his archer has finally returned, as he goes to meet with this hitman expecting to hear a success story, and instead sees a man on his knees apologizing for never finding his target, but explaining how the place he traveled to was completely unlivable because every animal, plant, and insect in the area seems like it's out to get you. Ozai isn't very happy with this as he forces the man to go back home and resign, but now it's time to see him break the news to his wife that her lover is dead. He walks into the dining room and tells Ursa's aides to leave, as he grabs her by the hand and tells her that on their wedding day, he warned her that her entire life belonged to him now, and that any contact with people from her past, especially past lovers, would be seen as treason. Ursa screams that she knew Ozai was reading her letters and says, "How dare you?" while Ozai tells Ursa that the worst thing in all of this is evidence of her cheating still lives inside of his house, as he tells Ursa that he'll show mercy and allow Zuko to live despite the fact that he isn't his. However, the price to pay for that was the life of Ursa's boyfriend, Ikam. When he mentions the man's name, Ursa's entire expression changes as she questions the Fire Lord on just what it was that he did. But when Ozai responds that he wiped that traitorous dog from existence, we see just a tear falling down onto Ursa's cheek as her entire reality just shattered, and she begins to realize that while there's not really a future between her and Ozai, the one hope that she had outside of him just vanished. Or did he? When Azula and Zuko try to find their mom in the Fire Nation, they need to sneak in alongside Team Avatar since people would make a scene if they realized the Avatar and Fire Lord Zuko were there, as the group comes upon a play called Love Amongst Dragons, which is the same play we saw at the beginning of our story. After the two dragons on the stage kiss, Zuko starts to ask around about his mother Ursa, and as a woman is about to answer his question, a strange figure wearing a blue Oni mask shows up, telling them that he used to know her since he's the director of the theater group. Once everyone is there, we see Katara and Aang getting relationship advice from Norin's wife as Azula scares his daughter, but eventually the tea comes out and Norin explains that Ursa was taken to the Fire Nation capital when he was younger, but her boyfriend Ikam ended up going missing in the Forgetful Valley, which is a forest outside of town that heartbroken people go to forget their lives. Noriko, the man's wife, says she vaguely remembers a rumor about Ursa coming back to town to look for Ikam and leaving to find him at Forgetful Valley, but the husband says that's impossible since no one has seen or heard from her ever since she married Ozai. With that, the group feels like they have enough information to head out, as Azula tells Zuko how badly she wanted to burn the house down because nobody is that happy, as Katara says her and Aang are, and Azula calls them idiots. Aang pulls Zuko to the side and tells him that he apologizes if he was rude to him earlier, but all of this is really difficult for Aang to wrap his head around, so we can only imagine how hard it is for Zuko and Azula. The issue though is that Aang tells Zuko that he actually doesn't think they should go and find his mother's boyfriend, and they should burn the letter that put Zuko's lineage in question. Because no matter what the truth is, Zuko represents peace and love in this era, and he has to remain Fire Lord no matter what. It's really interesting to see Aang take a sort of Game of Thrones approach to politics, but Zuko explains to Aang that he already gave Azula the letter back as he pushes forward through the forest towards the last place his mom was rumored to be, Forgetful Valley. Back in the past, we see a flashback where Azula makes fun of Zuko, telling him that he's going to be adopted, as her mom comes in and pulls Azula to the side, asking her why she's telling him that. And Azula lets Ursa know that she overheard a discussion between Ozai and his father, where Ozai was told that his punishment for disrespect is the loss of his firstborn, as Ursa rushes to confront Ozai with all of the calm rage of a mother trying to protect her son. Ursa tells Ozai that she won't allow this and tells him to listen closely because she has a deal. Despite Ozai saying she has nothing that he wants, Ursa tells Ozai that she can make a flavorless, colorless, and odorless poison that he can use on his father to avoid this entire situation and become the Fire Lord immediately. Ozai isn't a fool, so he takes his deal. However, he tells Ursa that in exchange she has to immediately leave the Fire Nation after giving him the poison, because he knows one day she or someone that she's taught will be right back in the lab again, making the poison to get rid of him someday. Ursa tries her best to argue that she should be able to take their children, but Ozai tells her he's going to keep Zuko and Azula as collateral just in case Ursa ever decides to come back, since he knows she'll never try to return if she knows he'll hurt them if she does. And on top of this, he tells her that if she tries to escape with them, he'll hunt them down to the ends of the earth, just like he did her boyfriend Ikam. When everything is said and done, Ursa makes the poison for Ozai as she visits Azula's room and gives her a kiss on the cheek before visiting Zuko and telling him that she did this for them. As Ursa officially vanishes, but next we're gonna find her. On the mission to find Zuko's mom, Azula and Team Avatar land at Forgetful Valley as everyone in the group spots a giant strange stone, and Zuko wonders where the path through the forest is. But this causes Azula to start acting crazy again, telling him that firebenders always have a path, as she starts burning her way through the forest. This gets everyone mad, but Aang feels a special connection to the land and makes a strange face again, as Sokka notices that all around them there are actually faces on everything, from the leaves to the frogs and even the trees. As Sokka spots a bat with symbols on its back that look the same as the face Aang is making, we see Aang chase it through the forest before eventually coming upon a large round lake in the center of the forest that looks like a pane of glass because of how pure the water is. Aang tells everyone to be extra respectful here because this is a very spiritual place, but of course Azula looks into the water and sees her mother again telling her to go away, as she sends a bolt of lightning directly into the water, screaming, "Why don't you shut up?" As Aang asks her just what the hell it is that she's doing, and Azula starts fighting everyone in the group because she thinks her mom made them lead her here. Katara takes matters into her own hands and says that Azula is too dangerous and enough is enough. It's time to end her. But at that moment, something strange happens. We see two sharp lotus flowers fly into frame as Aang and the others have to dodge, and Katara gets hit in the arm, causing her to lose concentration on bending. This continues as a storm of these start to fly towards them like shuriken, and Team Avatar starts to realize that it's almost like the forest itself is attacking them. Katara, being an expert waterbender, says she realizes what's going on here thanks to Sokka, since the flowers are shattering as if they're completely frozen, so someone is using waterbending in the forest around them to attack them. On the side, as Aang is about to get ran through by a bunch of vines, Sokka throws his boomerang and saves Aang, saying that's not all they're bending, but when the roots continue towards him while he's helpless, he's actually shocked when Azula steps in to save him with her blue flames. Sokka says thanks, and Azula says the more peasants she has helping her, the easier this mission will be, as Zuko gets captured by the vines and needs to get saved by Aang, who also gets thrown to the ground by the power of the forest. This is where Katara really starts to shine as she looks at the entire forest falling around her and trying to kill her, and calmly begins to use her bending to control all of the plants in the area, yelling out, "Whoever you are, you're not the only one who can waterbend, so show yourself." As Katara uses her waterbending to take control of the whole forest around them to save Team Avatar and Azula, we see a group of two waterbenders walking out of the forest after realizing the jig is up, and Katara looks shocked when she sees them, and eventually they all make camp together to discuss just what the issue is, as these two strange waterbenders explain that they just thought someone was attacking the pool of water that must remain undisturbed, and they just aren't used to seeing humans in these parts. Aang comments that he's heard that this is a very spiritual place, and he is told that there are 3 pools inside of the valley that must all remain undisturbed as instructed by the spirits. But also, these two reveal that they're members of the Northern Water Tribe, causing Katara to wonder just how they ended up in a Fire Nation forest. From here, the woman explains that her and her brother were always complete opposites, with her always following the rules, but her brother always trying to break them. At some point, after robbing half of the warriors in the tribe just to show them he could, despite returning everything he stole, he was eventually taken out on a mission and terribly disfigured by his fellow Water Tribe members, and when his sister found him, she tried everything she could do to have him healed, but the solution she found was crazy. As Katara is learning the backstory of the mysterious waterbenders hidden within the Fire Nation's Forgetful Valley, it's here where we cut back to the past and see a hooded figure knocking on a door late at night as a young girl opens the door and wonders just who the woman standing before her is, but we know that this is Zuko's mom Ursa returning to the village to look for her parents, only to be told they both passed away years ago. Ursa roams through the village crying until the morning, where she just ends up sitting on the stage of the local theater group, and this is when a man named Norin, who we've already met in our story, stumbles upon Ursa, telling her tryouts for the next play ended a week ago, as Ursa tells him she's just visiting old memories, and he looks up to the beautiful woman crying with a look of realization on his face. He introduces himself and tells Ursa that sitting on an empty stage seems like a terrible way to start the day, as he offers to buy her breakfast, and she bows to him, smiling and going along, as it seems like this guy either realizes who she is or is just struck by her beauty and decided to rizz her up. But soon she's going to make a shocking discovery. After learning about Forgetful Valley from two waterbenders, we see them say they'd do anything for each other since they're brother and sister, and as Azula and Zuko look away from each other, Azula questions if either of them have seen a woman named Ursa, and when they reply that they haven't, Aang decides to help them anyway since they need the giant wolf spirit from earlier to drink from the same pool that they're waiting at. So this causes Aang to enter the spirit world by meditating at the side of the pool, but off on the side, Azula feels like this is a complete waste of time since helping these strangers won't get them any closer to finding their mother. Zuko explains to her that Aang is the Avatar, so his job is to help people, and as members of Team Avatar, it's their job, and now Azula's job to help him do that. It's at that moment where Azula snaps, thinking that somehow her mother planned all of this, as she screams into the forest that she must be getting close, so that's why there are so many distractions. Azula goes absolutely crazy as she runs towards the two friendly waterbenders with a bolt of lightning in hand and fires it at them, even though Zuko tries to get in the way and block it. But at that same moment, we see Aang finally connecting with the spirit world as he realizes he's surrounded by wicked faces everywhere in the forest, and his search for the spirit wolf begins. After Aang enters the spirit world to find the massive spirit wolf he's looking for, he finds it just before it takes a drink of water, telling it that there's a tastier pool of water over there. In that moment, the wolf begins to dart off to another location as Aang grabs it to tag along, and he doesn't realize that he's been whisked away to a massive chamber where he hears a voice ask him, "Who dares ride my wolf?" And we see Aang look up to see a massive god made of wood and featureless faces that spin around its head, with hundreds of masks and faces floating around her, as she tells Aang that she is the mother of all faces. Back in the physical world, we see Zuko casually deflecting Azula's lightning and sending it flying away, as Sokka says that he's officially scared of Zuko again, but Azula tells him to stand aside since their mother sent those two to keep them in this forest. Zuko finally has enough, saying he's been too naive, asking Katara and Sokka to help him take her down, as they all fight in front of the pool of water until Aang wakes up, telling them all to stop at once since they're about to have a visitor. At this moment, hundreds of masks start to float up out of the pool of water as we see the mother of faces step into reality, once again looking terrifying, and this story takes an interesting turn. After Zuko's mom returns home and goes out to breakfast with a man named Norin, she tells him that his name seems like such a strange coincidence since in the play Love Amongst Dragons, the Dragon Emperor's name was Norin, and now a man of that same name directs the play. The man smiles, wiping his lips, saying that Ursa has a point there, but when she realizes that she actually hasn't given him her name yet and he still knows it, she gets up saying thank you for breakfast. This causes Norin to stand up fast, saying, "Please, let me explain," as he tells Ursa that when they were 6, she kicked him in the stomach and pushed his face in the dirt. Then when they were 21, she shattered his heart after she left for the Fire Nation, and now she's gonna walk away before they even have a chance to have a proper conversation. Ursa realizes who this is talking to her as she says, "Ikum?" And the man says, "My dear Ursa, don't you think you've hurt me enough?" As this story starts to make more and more sense. We push back to the present where we see the God of Faces telling everyone that she grants one human a favor once every season, causing Aang to realize that they can't learn about Ursa since the two waterbenders have been waiting there way longer for this encounter. So of course Azula runs in and actually steals the favor from them, but what she learns shocks everyone. After Azula steals a wish from the God of Faces, she finds out that her mother actually came to the god and had her face changed to a much plainer one, with Zuko recognizing her as Noriko, the wife of Norin that they met earlier in the story. However, the waterbenders that were there still want the Mother of Faces to help them. However, when she abandons them, telling everyone she only grants one wish per season, we see Aang dive into the sacred pool to go after her as he forms an air bubble around himself and even sees faces on all of the fish and rocks below the surface. And he's approached by 4 massive crabs that begin to attack him, causing Aang to use waterbending to freeze their claws as he calls out to the Mother of Faces, asking her how she can be so cruel. At that moment, a massive face in the earth begins to spit out bubbles as they form a massive jet stream that shoots Aang out of the water, and when this happens, we see the Mother of Faces return, telling Aang that since the beginning of time, she crafted everyone's face with love and care. However, humans keep coming to her, asking them to make another one like she's their servant, and her work is inadequate. From here, she tells Aang that even though he's the Avatar, he's just as greedy as the rest of the humans, as all around him he hears the words "get out," and the God of Faces turns the entire forest around them. Back in the past, we see as Azula's mom enters a warehouse, and she smiles, thinking of all the memories she has of all of these different props, saying that when she lived in the palace, she had a few masks secretly made that she kept like treasures. It's here where Norin, who if you remember is Ikum, tells her that when she left, he basically died because everyone in town knew them as Ikum and Ursa, so without her, everything in life life felt wrong. There would even be times where people would come up to him telling him everything would be okay, but he knew that they were lying or were just trying to be helpful. This eventually led Ikem to travel to Forgetful Valley, where one day he stumbled upon a powerful spirit that roams the valley who has the power to give you an entirely new face and a new life. Ikem says he came back to Hira as a different person, however Ursa still has her doubts despite the fact that she can see the proof that this is true in front of her eyes. She asked the man why he never married or had children, and he says that the entire time he was waiting for her, so now he tells her that they can finally be together if she comes with him to Forgetful Valley and changes her face too, but as a mother Ursa says she doesn't know if she could leave her children behind, saying that even thinking about them all the time is torture, as she agrees to at least travel to the valley. As Team Avatar gets chased out of Forgetful Valley, we see Ursa and Ikem make their way into the valley in the past, as together they survive in the forest for years living off of the land and capturing all of their own food, until one day the giant spirit wolf appears before them drinking from the pond near their camp, which lets Ikem know that the god of faces is near. Ursa tells Ikem that living like this with him over the last few months makes her think that she's finally found her place in this world, but when Ikem suggests that she goes to get their kids so that the god of faces can change them all and make them a family, she tells him that he doesn't know Ozai and doing this would just place their entire village in danger. As the god of faces exits the water, we see Ursa walking up and asking her for a brand new face, but the mother wonders why Ursa, who has a face so beautiful, would want another, asking her if she'd even take an extremely plain face. It's here where Ursa realizes that just changing her face won't take away her pain, so the mother of faces offers to wipe all of her painful memories away, however this would also wipe away the memory of her children. Ursa at first doesn't want to do it, but eventually apologizes to Zuko and Azula for being such a horrible person and agrees to wipe her memory so her new life can begin. We see the god placing a new face on her head and grabbing Ursa's head with both of her gigantic hands as light begins to glow from Ursa's face as she screams. As Ikem runs towards his love, the mother of faces recedes back into the lake and Ursa opens her eyes, not remembering anything but her husband Norin, as their new life begins and the two of them get married. Back in the present day, we see Zuko reaching Norin's house as he watches his mother through a window and sees that Azula still hasn't made it to town thanks to them using a shortcut to get back. Zuko eventually comes in and Norin says he had a feeling that he would return. Zuko tries to eat with the family, but Noriko notices that he's really quiet, so Zuko asks her if she's happy. When she says yes, Zuko gets up to walk away, but Norin stands up telling Noriko that he knew this moment would come sooner or later, telling Zuko to reveal the truth. As Zuko tells Noriko that he's Zuko, Lord of the Fire Nation, and though she doesn't remember it right now, she's his mother. In the forest, we see Aang and everyone getting attacked by the entire forest after pissing off the mother of faces. When Aang knocks off a waterbender's mask by accident, he realizes that the man has had his face stolen by Ko the Face Stealer. And upon hearing his name, the mother of faces tells Aang to repeat what he said as he explains the giant ugly monster that he saw, and the god of faces explains that this is actually her son, despite him using a different name than the one she gave him. The god asks Aang how he knows her son because she's heard that her son misses her so much that he's been stealing faces. Aang explains how even in a past life, Ko wasn't known as a kind spirit and actually had to be spared by the past avatar after stealing a face from someone he loved. This causes the god to grab the avatar's face, saying she feels Ko's handiwork here and that it's nice to sort of feel close to her son again in some way, as she repairs the waterbender's face, and Aang thanks her, saying that he knows that humans can be selfish, but he appreciates her healing the relationship between a mother and son and a brother and sister. Back at Norin's house, we see them explaining to Zuko's mom everything about her past life and how she had her face changed and her memories removed, but as everything is going well, Azula arrives. Azula and Sokka crash through the roof as it seems like the two of them were fighting, as Azula kicks Zuko out of the way and stands before her mother, who can't even remember her, telling her how long she's waited for this day and screaming all sorts of things that Ursa can't understand at the moment. Sokka actually saves Norin and his daughter by hitting Azula in the head of his boomerang and stunning her for a second, but when Azula jumps onto Ursa and holds her up against a wall with flames in her hand, screaming that it all ends right now, Zuko screams to her to let their mom go. Ursa tells Azula that she can't remember anything, but if what she says is true, she's sorry that she didn't love her enough, as she puts her hand on her daughter's face. From here, Zuko gets in between them and the two of them start to fight in the house, spreading fire everywhere, while Zuko tries to protect his mom and finally put his sister down. Azula finally has enough as she prepares her lightning, but Zuko warns her, telling her that she already knows he can redirect it anywhere, so she better stop. Not listening, she fires a ball at him that he sends flying right back at her, which knocks her down and takes her out of the fight. As Azula explains she can't escape the voices in her head, Azula tells Zuko that if he wanted the throne so badly, he could have thrown her off the cliff before and been rid of her and the letter, but Zuko puts on his crown and tells Azula that in his heart he's always known that the throne is his destiny. But one fact will never change, and that's that Azula is his sister. She sheds a tear and sends fire his way that he splits as she uses the distraction to escape the building, causing Zuko and Noriko to chase after her, as Azula continues to cry, telling Zuko that even when he's strong, he's weak. Her way of letting him know that she needs her space after everything that's happened, and if you want to know what Azula does next, you can check out my Azula in the Spirit Temple video to hear her full story. From here, Noriko grabs Zuko's attention and directs it to the coast, where we see the Mother of Faces approaching the two of them, with Aang and Appa in the sky above. It's here where the God of Faces asks Noriko if she wishes to remember who she used to be and go back to her old life, with Zuko telling her not to. Despite this, she says yes, and this means that in just a few moments, Zuko will finally have his mother back with all of her memories, and will finally get some answers. We see the giant being putting her hand on Noriko's head, as Katara worries that Azula might be back any second, and Aang tells her that he thinks that Azula dropped a letter for Zuko on purpose, and he's sure that she's not going to be coming back since she might have had a change of heart. The group thinks about all the good they did on this journey as they help bring together a brother and sister and a mother and son, and from there we move forward in time just a little bit to see Ikam's family roasting some dinner by the fire as Zuko and his newly restored mother walk out of the house, and he thinks that she should probably go and speak to them. However, Ursa tells Zuko that it's the two of them that need to talk most. Ursa apologizes to Zuko for forgetting him, which is something that she thinks is unforgivable for a mother to do, but Zuko says everything worked out. However, despite becoming the Fire Lord because it was his destiny, he still has one question for his mother as he hands her the note she wrote saying Zuko is an Ozai's son. And it's here where Ursa reveals that this letter actually isn't true. She wrote it to Ikam, however she did so under the suspicion that Ozai was reading her letters, and writing a lie like this would be your best chance at getting him to react and confirm her suspicions. We see in the past that during the argument where Ozai tells Ursa he got rid of Ikam, he acknowledges that he knows Zuko is his son. However, since Ursa wishes so badly that he wasn't his, Ozai tells Ursa to watch closely every time he treats Zuko like the son of a treacherous dog, since he'll simply be fulfilling his mother's wishes. Back in the present day, the mother and son bond over how horrible Ozai is before accepting that he's still family. At this moment, Ursa can tell something is still wrong, asking Zuko to tell her how he's feeling, and from this point he explains that he wants to know everything about her and his father and the world that she knew before he was born, as Ursa promises to fill her son in on everything from the very beginning, and this story reaches its end with a mother and son reunited. Now, this isn't the last time that we'll see these two, as there's another story that picks up right after the events of this one, and it's probably one of the best Avatar comics, so please come back for more.